Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Okay, so let's continue with the opening of the eyes. In the past, when the world-honored one of great enlightenment first attained the way, Buddhas appeared in the 10 directions to counsel and encourage him, and various great bodhisattvas were dispatched to him. When he preached the Wisdom Sutra, he covered the major world system with his long tongue, and 1,000 Buddhas appeared in the 10 directions. When he preached the Golden Light Sutra, the 4 Buddhas appeared in the 4 directions, and when he preached the Amida Sutra, the Buddhas of the 6 directions covered the major world system with their tongues. And when he preached the Great Collection Sutra, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions gathered in the Great Treasure Chamber. Of course, need I remind you that these long, broad tongues are simply the spread of the word, because everything was taught by mouth back then. Nothing was written down. So they were all sermons. They were repeated and memorized, and that's how the teaching spread. So that's what this is saying. But when we compare the auspicious signs that accompanied these sutras with those accompanying the Lotus Sutra, we find that they are like a yellow stone compared to gold, a white cloud to a white mountain, ice to a silver mirror, or the color black to the color blue, the bleary-eyed, the squint-eyed, the one-eyed, and the wrong-viewed will be likely to confuse them. Since the Flower Garland Sutra was the first sutra to be preached, there were no previous words of the Buddha for it to contradict, and so it naturally raised no doubts. In the case of the Great Collection Sutra, the Larger Wisdom Sutra, the Golden Light Sutra, and the Amida Sutra, the Buddha, in order to censure the ideal of the 2 vehicles demonstrated in the various Hinayana Sutras, described the pure lands of the 10 directions, and thereby inspired ordinary people and bodhisattvas to aspire to attain them. Thus he caused the persons of the 2 vehicles to feel confounded and vexed. The 2 vehicles we're talking about are Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, or in more modern terms, learning and realization. The 7th and 8th worlds, if you're keeping track of the 10 worlds. Again, because there are certain differences between the Hinayana Sutras and the Mahayana Sutras mentioned above, and the Mahayana Sutras mentioned, we find that in some cases Buddhas appeared in the 10 directions, in other great bodhisattvas were dispatched from the 10 directions, or it may clear that the particular sutra was expounded in the words of the worlds of the 10 directions, or that various Buddhas came from the 10 directions to meet in assembly. In some cases it was said that Shakyamuni Buddha covered the major world systems with his tongue, while in others it was various Buddhas who put out forth their tongues. All of these statements are intended to combat the view expounded in the Hinayana Sutras that the worlds of the 10 directions there is only one Buddha. So, in his own way, Nichiren is doing exactly what I'm trying to do, is he's trying to demystify all the misunderstanding of all these teachings, and once again, this falls under the umbrella of studying all Buddhist scholarship, not just one narrow avenue. Because without studying the entirety of Buddhism, you won't have this perspective. You won't understand the hyperbole of the storytelling. You start taking everything literally. That's what we humans do. We like to identify and categorize, and then we get attached to those categorizations. This is the whole central theme of Buddhism, right? But in the case of the Lotus Sutra, it differs so greatly from the previous Mahayana sutras that Shariputra and the other voice hearers, the great bodhisattvas and the various human and heavenly beings, when they heard the Buddha preach it, were led to think, quote, "Is this not a devil pretending to be the Buddha?" End quote. And yet those bleary-eyed men of the flower garland, dharma characteristics, three treatises, true word, and Nembutsu schools, all seem to think that their own particular sutras are exactly the same as the Lotus Sutra. That is what I call wretched perception indeed. So there's quite an admonition, and Nichiren saying exactly what I've been saying, or I've been saying exactly what Nichiren's saying, lest we pay homage to my arrogance. While the Buddha was still in this world, there were undoubtedly those who set aside the sutras he had taught during the first 40 and more years of his teaching life and embraced the Lotus Sutra. But after he passed away, it must have been difficult to find persons who would open and read this sutra and accept its teachings. To begin with, the sutras preached earlier run to countless words, while the Lotus Sutra is limited in length. The earlier sutras are numerous, but the Lotus Sutra is no more than a single work. The earlier sutras were preached over a period of many years, but the Lotus Sutra was preached in a mere 8. Moreover, the Buddha, as we have seen, has been called the great liar, and therefore one can hardly be expected to believe his words. If one makes a great effort to believe the unbelievable, one can perhaps bring oneself to believe in the earlier sutras, but not in the Lotus Sutra. The people today appear to believe in the Lotus Sutra, but in fact they do not really believe in it. The reason is this. When someone assures them that the Lotus Sutra is the same as the Mahavajrayana Sutra, or that it is the same as the Flower Garland Sutra, or the Amida Sutra, they are pleased and place their resolute mind of determination in this person. If someone tells them that the Lotus Sutra is completely different from all the other sutras, they'll not listen to him. Or even if they should listen, they would not think that the person was really speaking the truth. Boy, isn't that a good definition of how we behave. Nichiren has this to say. It is now over 700 years since Buddhism was introduced to Japan. During that time, only the great teacher Dengyo truly understood the Lotus Sutra, but no one is willing to heed this fact that Nichiren has been teaching. It is just as the Lotus Sutra says, quote, "If you were to seize Mount Sumeru and fling it far off to the measureless Buddha lands, that too would not be difficult. But if after the Buddha has entered extinction in the time of evil, you can preach this sutra, that will be difficult indeed." The powerful assertions I am putting forward are in complete accord with the sutra itself, but as the Nirvana Sutra, which is intended to propagate the Lotus Sutra, states, "In the defiled times of the latter age, those who slander the correct teaching will be as numerous as the specks of dirt in all the lands of the 10 directions, while those who uphold the correct teaching will be as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail." What do you think of that? Would you say that the people of Japan can be squeezed into the space of a fingernail? Would you say that I, Nichiren, occupy the 10 directions? Consider the matter carefully. In the reign of a worthy ruler, what is reasonable will prevail. But when a foolish ruler reigns, does this not remind you of today? When a foolish ruler reigns, then what is unreasonable will have supremacy. One should understand that, in similar fashion, when a sage is in the world, then the true significance of the Lotus Sutra will become apparent. In my remarks here, I have been contrasting the early sutras with the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and it would appear as though the early sutras are in a position to prevail. But If they really went out over the theoretical teaching, then it means that Shariputra and the other persons of the two vehicles will never be able to attain Buddhahood. That would surely be lamentable. I now turn to the second important teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, was born in the Kalpa of Continuance, in the 9th period of decrease, when the span of human life measured 100 years. He was the grandson of King Shimahanu, and the son and heir of King Suddhodana. As a boy, he was known as Crown Prince Siddhartha, or the Bodhisattva, all goals achieved. At the age of 19, he left his family, and at 30, he attained enlightenment. At his place of enlightenment, the world-honored one first revealed the ceremony of Vajrayana Buddha of the Lotus Treasury World, a land of actual reward, and expounded the 10 mysteries, the 6 forms, the perfect interfusion of all things, and the subtle and wonderful great teaching for immediate attainment of the ultimate fruit. At that time, the Buddhas of the 10 directions appeared on the scene, and all the Bodhisattvas gathered about like clouds, in view of the place where Shakyamuni preached, the capacity of the listeners, the presence of the Buddhas, and the fact that it was the first sermon. Is there any reason the Buddha could have concealed or held back the great doctrine? Therefore, the Flower Garland Sutra says, quote, he displayed his power freely and expounded a sutra of perfection and fullness, end quote. The work, which consists of 60 volumes, is indeed a sutra of perfection and fullness in its every character and stroke. It may be compared to the wish-granting jewel that, though it is a single jewel, is the equal of countless such jewels, for the single jewel can rain down 10,000 treasures, which are equal to the treasures brought forth by 10,000 jewels. In the same way, one character of the Flower Garland Sutra is equal to 10,000 characters. The passage that expounds the identity of, quote, the mind, the Buddha, and all living things, end quote, living beings, represents this core not only of the Flower Garland teachings, but of the teachings of the Dharma characteristics, 3 treatises, true word, and the 10 Dai schools as well. In such a superb sutra, how could there be any truths that are hidden from the hearer? And yet we find the sutra declaring that persons of the 2 vehicles and ichantikas can never attain Buddhahood. Here is the flaw in the jewel. Moreover, in 3 places the sutra speaks of Shakyamuni Buddha as attaining enlightenment for the first time in this world. It thus hides the fact that Shakyamuni Buddha actually attained enlightenment in the remote past, as revealed in the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra. Thus the Flower Garland Sutra is in fact a chipped jewel, a moon veiled in clouds, a sun in eclipse, a strange thing indeed. The sutras of the Agama, correct and equal, and wisdom periods, such as the Mahavajrayana Sutra, since they were expounded by the Buddha, are splendid works, and yet they cannot begin to compare with the Flower Garland Sutra. Therefore, one could hardly expect that doctrines concealed even in the Flower Garland Sutra would be revealed in these sutras. Thus we find that the miscellaneous Agama Sutra speaks of Shakyamuni Buddha as having attained the way for the first time in this present existence. The Great Collection Sutra says, quote, it is 16 years since the thus come one first attained the way, end quote. And the Vimalakirti Sutra says, for the first time the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and thought, and though his mind conquered the devil, end quote. Likewise, the Mahavajrayana Sutra describes the Buddha's enlightenment as having taken place, quote, long ago when I sat at the place of meditation, end quote. And the Benevolent King's Wisdom Sutra referred to it as an event of, quote, 29 years, end quote, in the past. It is hardly surprising that these sutras should speak in this fashion, but there is something that is an astonishment to both the ear and the eye. This is the fact that the Immeasurable Meanings Sutra also speaks in the same way. In the Immeasurable Meanings Sutra, the Buddha denies the great doctrines such as the Flower Garland Sutra concept of the phenomenal world as created by the mind alone, the concept of the ocean imprint meditation set forth in the Sutras of the Correct and Equal Period, and the Wisdom Sutra concept of mutual identification and non-duality, when he declares, quote, "I have not yet revealed the truth," end quote. The Immeasurable Meanings Sutra regards the practices taught in the previous sutras as practices that require many kalpas to complete. However, the same sutra says, quote, "In the past, I sat upright in the place of meditation for 6 years under the Bodhi tree and was able to gain supreme perfect enlightenment," end quote. Using the same type of language as the Flower Garland Sutra, the first sutra Shakyamuni preached after his enlightenment, when it talks of the Buddha having attained enlightenment for the first time in this world. Strange as this may seem, we may suppose that since the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra is intended to serve as an introduction to the Lotus Sutra, it deliberately refrains from speaking about doctrines to be revealed in the Lotus Sutra itself. But when we turn to the Lotus Sutra, we find that in the section where the Buddha discusses in both concise and expanded form the replacement of the 3 vehicles with the 1 vehicle, he says, quote, "The true aspect of all phenomena can only be understood and shared between Buddhas," end quote. Quote, "The world-honored one has long expounded his doctrines and now must reveal the truth," end quote. And, quote, "honestly discarding expedient means, I will preach only the unsurpassed way," end quote. Moreover, Many Treasures Buddha testifies to the verity of the 8 chapters of the theoretical teaching, declaring that these are all true. We would suppose, therefore, that in them there would be nothing held back or concealed. Nevertheless, the Buddha hides the fact that he attained enlightenment countless kalpas ago, for he says, quote, "I first sat in the place of meditation and gazed at the tree and walked around it," end quote. This is surely the most astounding fact of all. So what is Nichiren circling around himself here? And I'm sure some of you are already answering that. Buddha is not a person. It's a state of mind. But consider how you might teach that 3,000 years ago, 2,600 years ago, whatever calendar you're using. Can you imagine teaching 200 years ago atomic theory to people of that day? Would you be laughed out of the room? Would you be persecuted or they'd just lock you up? Maybe he's nuts. Or they just wouldn't pay attention to you at all, right? People adamantly believe what they think they know. And so take thousands of years ago, the mental development of that time. I'm not saying those people were stupid by any stretch. What I'm saying, though, is the way they understood the world around them was very different than the way we do now. And this is what Nichiren is exploring, and this is in the 13th century. We've come a long way since then, right? Another 700 or so years. Right? So how much have we changed since then? So again, I want to introduce to you that all this discussion about I gained enlightenment under the tree or just now or whatever, this is about, and this is the great teaching of the Lotus Sutra, this is about understanding that all of us can awaken our Buddha nature. All of us can do so with some concentrated effort. Right? In order to have concentrated effort, you have to be determined to do it. You have to be determined to open up that gateway to your Buddha mind, a shift of perception. Now, if you gain that shift of perception, like when you studied your math homework or your English homework or whatever homework it was that you were doing at school, and suddenly something made sense to you. Once something makes sense to you like that, once you open that door in your mind, can you go back through it? You can pretend you can go back through it. You can play the game of going back through it, but you can never unknow something, right? Isn't that how our minds work? So all along, Buddhism has been teaching this process, how you can turn that light on. But even today, to tell somebody, oh, by the way, that light's been on all along, you just haven't chosen to look there. That's a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it? Because we have our egos protected. Wait, what do you mean I've had this all along? And you look back and you think, man, I've done some stupid stuff in my life. Are you telling me I was awake then? No. I was just a stupid human then. Now I understand. See, this is the story of Buddha. This is the story of Buddhism. We want to end our perpetual attachment to thingness and our foolishness. Right? We know it. If you don't want to use Buddhist terms for it, fine. But it's in all our cultures. Whatever culture you're from, whatever country, whatever race, whatever sex, doesn't matter. We all have regrets about the past behaviors. And what are those regrets founded on? Not knowing, not understanding. Now I get it. This is Buddhism. Buddhism says there is a place where you can get it, where there's no longer any regression. You don't repeat your stupidity. You don't repeat your errors. You don't repeat your misperceptions. Wow, is that even possible? Right? So this is the whole story of Buddha throughout all of his sermons. And this is what Nichiren is now pointing out. When finally, in the final years of his life, he said, look. It's been countless unfathomable eons since I attained enlightenment. He's not saying him personally. He's saying Buddha-ness. Enlightenment, awakening, has always been there. That's why it's available to each and every one of us. It's not some secret thing you uncover. It's something, well, uncover might be a better word, because it's there, right? We talk about this in science all the time. You know, we make discoveries. We don't really invent anything. We discover a truth that was already there. We just never saw it before. And so the Lotus Sutra, unique among all the teachings, is a teaching that Nichiren shows us is an actual method, is a condensed version of all his teachings, saying, it's already here. You just gotta focus, determine yourself to awaken and find that new perception of everything, of the world around you. You've been following a delusion. That's always difficult. Change is difficult. So this is in the title of the Gosho, isn't it? The opening of the eyes. Isn't that what it's like? When we suddenly see something that previously was not even on the radar for us, it's like an opening of the eyes, right? You know, oh, now I understand. There's a lot more. There's a lot more of this Gosho. Nichiren will show many, many examples. But I thought I'd pause for a moment and talk about this because it's specifically about our Nichiren practice, about our Buddhist practice, about the Lotus Sutra, about the practice that the founder of Buddhism himself accomplished. And here it is. Nichiren's dissecting it for us. Incredible. Very, very amazing scholar. And with that, it's about 25 minutes. I think that's a long enough video. We will continue, and I appreciate your participation. Thank you so much. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care.